Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Hello. We're going to start this debate by just launching into the topic. What is Europe's economic outlook? So at one point in history, Europe was the global leader, the strongest economy, innovating science, art, industry, and technology. But today, different story. One word, regulations. Two more, global competition. Two letters, AI. Can Europe orchestrate a comeback, or will it continue to decline? Today, we're debating that very question. What is Europe's economic outlook? I'm Clea Connor. I'm CEO of opentodebate. It's a pleasure to be here. As a knowledge partner, we're collaborating with FII live in Riyadh. As America's leading debate organization, our goal here is to prove that debate doesn't have to be divisive. Not all argument is bad. In fact, argument can be very good. So that's what we're going to do. We have a format called Unresolved, where our panel is going to answer yes or no to a series of 3 questions, followed by a conversation where we explore why and how they disagree. Just so you know, we're recording this session for the Open to Debate podcast. This is going to become an NPR program in the United States, distributed next month. So your round of applause will be heard by millions of Americans.
Very few hands.
Yeah.
Exactly.
There we go.
So let's get started.
Yeah, look at that.
A round of applause for our debaters. This is a debate after all.
Little but good.
We have 3 CEOs on stage with us who have mobilized billions in capital all across Europe. So let's shed some light on this topic. I want to introduce them. First, Dr. Aaron Landy, CEO of Brevin Howard, widely considered to be one of the top global macro hedge funds. Welcome, Dr. Landy.
Thank you, Claire.
Next, Sir Martin Sorrell, founder and former CEO of WPP, the world's largest advertising and marketing services company. Now he serves as founder and executive chairman of S4 Capital Group. Welcome, Sir Martin. And Mr. Christian Sinding, CEO and managing partner of EQT Partners, a global investment organization with over 232 billion euros in assets under management. So one thing to establish, do I have all your permissions to interrupt you should that be necessary?
Fine.
This is a debate after all.
Try. Try.
Oh, I love the challenge. I'm up for the challenge. As the moderator, I'm going to give all of you permission to interrupt each other.
Okay.
So if you hear something that you want to break right in, you have to say, wait, 1 second. I need to take that on. And last order of business, you have this infinity sign representing the FII conference, the 8th conference here. So you're going to show us green when you answer yes, red when you answer no. It's like a stop and go. Are we ready?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Question number 1, our first topic. Europe's economic growth. The IMF recently released a report that projects Europe's annual GDP growth rate at 1.2% for 2025. That's compared to the world's growth at 3.2%. So GDP's up, just not as much as it could be, or as much as we might like. But let's debate if the numbers are telling the whole story. Here's the question. Is this modest growth a sign of resilience? Dr. Landy, are you a yes or a no?
I'm a no on that one.
A
Sir
no.
Martin?
That's 'cause
Okay.
his business depends on it.
We have one outlier.
Like I said, only half.
We have one outlier.
But
Let's start-
you expanded into Asia recently, if I
Yes,
remember
yes,
rightly.
we did.
Right?
Yeah.
Sir Martin, it's Dr. Landy's turn.
Is it?
Oh, okay.
You said we could...
Let's get started. You have 1 minute on the clock.
Okay. So Europe as a continent, from an investment point of view, is facing incredible headwinds. As you mentioned in your introduction, the regulation in Europe is a factor which is much worse than in other regions. Labor productivity is much weaker. The impact of technology on the workforce and working practices is again much weaker. And this is all linked, in my opinion, to the severe lack of investment over many years. So although it's true that the European economy has shown signs of improvement in recent months and quarters, nevertheless, that's just a short interruption in a secular period of challenge, which is unlikely to change soon.
Okay, well done, in under a minute. Sir Martin, why are you a no to the question?
Well, I'd agree with all that. Just maybe put it in a different context and a bit more nuanced. I think Eastern Europe is slightly different. I mean, if you look at Poland, there's a proportion of worldwide GDP, it's low, but it's sort of creeping up, whereas France, Germany, Italy, Spain, UK, going down. And I look at it in a different context. If you're trying to run a mini global company, which we are, you're really looking for growth. The world's a different place to what it was, where growth was certainly much more than 3%. Inflation was totally under control, and interest rates were close to zero, in some cases negative. In the future, or currently, growth is going to be more moderate. Inflation is more structural, as we heard from Larry this morning. And then last but not least, interest rates are going to be higher. In that environment, finding growth, it's not Ted Levitt's growth will be everywhere because of the demographics. You have to be selective. So North and South America, the Middle East, and Asia, with a qualifier on China we could go into. But Europe, for our clients, is about cost reduction. It's about efficiency and cost reduction. And therefore, AI and efficiency and technology are really important.
Let's come to that when we're going to have our discussion.
Yeah.
Yes or no?
I think my colleagues are a bit too bleak on the European economy as a whole. Right now, I think there are some challenges, certainly in the automotive sector, in the race for AI. But if you break it down if you talk about resilience first, we have very strong institutions, great education, we have strong banks, low unemployment. We have a north, where I'm from, that's very solid and growing. We have a south in Europe that's growing. And we have many sectors where we're world leaders, like renewables, for example, or education, educational software, veterinary care, lots of sectors and companies where we actually invest and find organic growth. Lots of technology companies that are maybe a bit smaller that are growing out of Europe into the world. So I think it's too easy to say that Europe is really challenged. Yes, we're going to go through a period now where we do need to drive reforms. And we need to get through some of these cyclical challenges. But once we get through that, we're still big investors and believers in Europe.
Okay.
I mean,
So let me take it. So I can see you want to jump right in. We have 5 minutes to explore this.
Subject, okay.
Europe's saving grace is it's big. I mean, if you think about it as one economy, it comes really after the US at 28 trillion and China at 18. It's about roughly the same size. So the big blessing, it's big. I remember we were discussing this as a JP Morgan Chase conference. I asked Jamie Dimon, about that geographically nuanced strategy that I mentioned. And he said, well, all countries offer opportunity. And in that sense, UK, France, Germany, Italy, Spain do offer significant opportunity because they're big. But public listed, it might be different for private equity. Might be different for hedge funds.
Is it different?
I think it is. And we had a little chat about it earlier, actually. If you're buying the continent, then I'd show a red color as well. But if you're actually breaking it down and either buying a sector or a company in a sector, and you can develop that, whether it's in advertising or in a hedge fund or in private equity, it's different. So I think, but what we need to do, another big challenge for Europe that we do need is we need more capital flows into those great companies, into those great sectors. That's another challenge.
And that's been the strategic problem that Europe's had for
why we have
a very long time, which is there's great education and great fundamental research, but it's not monetized, and there's no effective channel for bringing those inventive ideas to market. Whereas in the US, partly because it is one unified country, as opposed, you're 100% right, Martin, but the problem is you've got all these different balkanized countries with different rules and different regulations.
It's a mindset thing as well, though, isn't it?
Of course, because they don't
have
no equity mindset.
Investment institute, and with all due respect, the time frame of private equity, your whole period is what, 4 or 5 years?
That's right.
Right. So my dad.
A long time to compare to the public markets.
Yeah, but my dad said, join a company, build a long-term brand. Maybe that theory is gone because of the volatility of change. But a hedge fund and a PE firm have a different horizon to, I think, people in our industry in many respects. Except, listed company CEOs are under quarterly pressure for growth, which brings me back to where I was. You look for where the growth is.
That's right.
And Europe really doesn't offer
But there are
on a
some
consistent basis.
There are some areas. I mean, Spain has been growing very well because
Better.
Yeah.
Better. The periphery. Spain,
Yes.
Yeah.
Greece,
but
Portugal.
Germany is hopeless
At the moment.
Yeah.
at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah. France, pretty. And the UK, what do we think?
Well,
We
wait
ha-
till
we have-
tomorrow and see what happens.
It's going to be pretty grim news, isn't it?
It is going to be grim news,
Yeah.
I assume.
And the carry will be taxed.
And
think-
I will be taxed.
And you'll be on your. Are you a non-dom or
I live in Switzerland.
you live in Switzerland? Okay.
I'm a
So you're-
non-resident.
Okay, you're non-resident, so you already made the call.
I've been living there for 15 years. So
Okay, so you made the call a long time, very wisely. Okay, very wisely.
I do think, back to your comment on private equity, I do think we, hedge funds you can speak about, but we have a role to play to actually drive the transformation that's needed. For example, in life sciences, there are more patents every year in Europe produced in life sciences than in the US, but much fewer companies that are actually commercialized.
Yeah.
So we need capital to flow to young companies, to growth companies, and ultimately to the scaled companies, and that's a role that we play in private capital.
why do you think it is that there's such a shortage of capital in Europe? Because savings are high.
Yes.
They just don't get channeled in the right way.
They don't. I think there are a number of reasons. The one that, what's that?
Pension funds.
Well, it's
Pension
actually
funds?
capital flows.
I mean, if you look at the pension funds in the UK, they used to hold, what, 50% in equities? Now
it's
2%,
also the
4%?
pacification of asset management, actually.
So what are the best and worst monetary policies that are contributing to this? And considering what Europe has done recently.
Can we just round off on that question, because I think it's an important one.
Yeah.
There are so many different capital markets across Europe, and all of them are relatively small. They have different rules, different regulations, so capital formation is different, corporate law is different. And you compare that to the US, they have 2 big stock exchanges, super, super liquid, lots of capital, one regulatory regime. So we do need to do some more work in Europe to get the capital flowing. And we're finding opportunities now. In a sense, it's good for us because it's hard, but is it good for Europe?
So the
And
United States of
valuations
Europe?
are low in comparison to America.
They're lower than the US, yeah.
But that's the difference. I mean, I look at it that we're averagely intelligent. You are both super intelligent, so you can make wise decisions when the forces are against you. So I think we operate better in markets that are growing faster. And so when I look at the world, I mean, I think North and South America, I think Latin America actually, which your industry, I think, tends to be a little bit hesitant to invest in.
That's right.
The strength of the tech talent, the strength of the creative talent is so strong, big opportunity. Middle East, we see governments, particularly here, positioning their countries in a totally different way. It's not just about the Olympics and Formula One and the World Cup. This is about changing the way that people think about a country or a region culturally, socially, and politically.
Like Vision 2030.
Absolutely.
But that's
So
the essential
massive
thing.
growth opportunities. And then Asia. Africa is too volatile for my taste, and I think for our clients' taste. And then Asia as a whole, maybe with the exception of China, if you're big. If you're Louis Vuitton at 30% of sales in China, or BMW with 70% of its mini production in China, do you really want to be bigger? If you're Unilever at 9%, yes, you probably want to be bigger. So I think that conditions people's thinking in a way.
The vision that you see from the public sector here is incredible to build the economy. And that's the thing that is, in my view, markedly lacking in Europe. There's some incredible resources and incredible ingredients and no kind of central overarching vision of how to deploy them and develop them. And that's partly what Mario Draghi was writing about in his report, of course, but it's not obvious how that could change.
But what I take away from this part of the conversation is the opportunities in Europe are micro. They're not macro.
They're not macro. That actually is a perfect segue to this next question.
All right.
Thank you for that.
Well done.
Okay. We're going to turn to the second question. Europe is a regional market for investment. Europe's corporate earnings are nearly half that of American counterparts. The EU is determined, though, dedicating 3.5 billion euros to innovation ventures and scoring its member countries' innovation contributions. Still, the EU operates differently. It's characterized by a cautious and risk-averse approach with a rigorous regulatory environment. So let's see your yes or no answers to this one. Is now the time to invest in Europe? Dr. Landy, yes or no? Is now the time to invest in Europe?
I'm sorry to be bearish, but I'm a no again.
He's a no. Is now the time to invest in Europe? Sir Martin?
No, except Eastern Europe may be, despite the war, despite the Ukraine, I would just be a little bit, there's some opportunities there.
I'm hearing a soft no. Mr. Sinding, yes or no? Is it now the time to invest in Europe?
Of course. You know?
Optimist.
Yeah.
Optimist.
Not just optimist, but
in round
you know,
two.
It's not always good to follow the common wisdom.
Okay, well, why don't you tell us? Tell us why.
Well, we've basically started on the conversation. When markets are disruptive, when things are a bit more challenging, when maybe outside forces are looking in at Europe and saying, this is a complicated time for Europe, that's actually a really good time for us. We can then find great companies on the stock exchange. We've done a number of public to privates over the last year. Actually, we've invested half of the capital that we invested over the last year has been in Europe in those kinds of opportunities across actually the UK, France, Sweden, etc. So we're finding micro opportunities in this market, which is a bit disrupted, and we're buying those companies, which are really good companies that have growth potential at reasonable multiples as well. So for us, it's actually a good time to invest, even though there are challenges around the fringe.
So in this case, micro opportunities is an advantage.
It is.
Sir Martin, why are you a no?
Well, look, I believe in waves, right? And I believe in cycles. And I think countries go through cycles and regions and continents go through cycles. And I think Europe, I mean, if you think about China for a minute, in the early 19th century, China was, the biggest economy in the world. And the Chinese look at, they tend to look at the long term, hundreds of years, or certainly tens of years, where we tend to look much, much more short term. And they just think, in many respects, they're just reassuming the place they had before. And I think, just to put it in context, here from the UK, I was in Shanghai recently when the new British government announced two things. One, that we were probably going to go to a 4-day week, or a 3-day weekend as a working week, the rights and wrongs of that. And secondly, that workers, as they call them, and we have to define what a worker is, drives me nuts when people talks about workers as opposed to landlords or share owners, which the Prime Minister is now talking about. But basically, they wanted to prevent companies or give workers the right to prevent their bosses or employers from disturbing them after 6 p.m. at night. I recounted that to a Chinese audience, and they guffawed. They belly laughed at it because they operate on a 9-9-6 basis, 9 to 9, 6 days a week. Or that's
so. This is one big reason not to invest
in Europe. This is about the sclerotic development of Europe. Europe is exhibiting signs of old age from an economic point of view, lack of productivity, which we mentioned. I mean, the budget tomorrow, I hope, will have some measures to increase. It may increase capital gain tax, it may tax the carry or whatever, may do something about non-doms, but let's see them provide some means for investment, accelerated investment, that will help deal with the productivity trap that we've got ourselves in. And it's not just the UK.
Oh, hold that thought. One second.
It's Italy, it's
Dr. Landy, tell us why you're a no. Same reason as Sir Martin?
Fundamentally, yes.
Productivity?
Productivity is weak. But, and I completely agree that on the micro level, there are some very interesting opportunities, and the fundamental research that gets carried out in Europe in some of the areas you mentioned, and things like fusion and quantum computing, and there's incredible research output in Europe. And as Sir Martin said, there are sectors and areas and regions and countries that are doing very well. But from a macro perspective, the headwinds are there, and we've seen the news today in the press about Volkswagen planning to, for the first time in its history, close plants in Germany and potentially cut salaries by 10%. So it's not a pretty sight, and there's no strategic, in my view, there's no strategic vision from the business leadership or political leadership of how to change all of this. There are ways to do it, more investment, more technology, more productivity.
I was going to go to you because the Nordic countries are the innovators.
But then
They are.
look at Europe as a totality.
Yeah, they're pretty. Yeah, they are.
Germany needs to follow.
Not the same
know what?
productivity issue.
No, not the same productivity issues, but a very good social network there. But I think what those countries have done, what our countries have done, is actually to invest in the future. So we're some of the most digitized nations on earth. Public services are completely digitized. All the schools are digitized and have been for a long time. We're investing in in sustainable ventures, whether it's around the energy space or it's the most sustainable type of protein and aquaculture coming from my country, Norway. But these are smaller countries; they're easier to handle, and therefore we've been able to shift as well. And even Sweden actually has created a fantastic mini version of the Silicon Valley, where you're finding talents all the way in schools and then being able to support them all the way through to the stock exchange. So it's possible to do in Europe. I think the Draghi report is actually pretty good. I think we all like it.
But
It's
do you
all,
think- do you think
but
it's
how
not
do
gonna-
you excuse my language?
You have consensus on the
The
Draghi
question
report?
is how do we
France
how
and
do we
Germany are not
drive
gonna
that
agree on
through?
that.
What about AI? I mean, we're talking about investing in Europe. Is AI regulation going to hold Europe back?
Well, I think there are two things that the CEOs of the companies that we deal with have got to think about. One is the nuanced global approach, different regions, Europe versus Asia, etc. And the second is in a European context, it's using AI, quantum, blockchain, the much maligned metaverse, which probably is underhyped now, those technologies to improve efficiency and productivity in those countries. I think that's the opportunity in Europe to apply that. My problem is, when the former Prime Minister wanted to have an AI conference at Bletchley Park, what did it center on? It centered on regulation. There's a saying that the Americans innovate, the Chinese imitate, and the British or the Europeans regulate. And unfortunately, I think that's where the weight, we see this with the EU.
Do you agree? Do you agree with that? As the lone dissenting
I am the yes
opinion
man.
on the
I am
panel?
the yes man. So this time I actually agree. Regulation is one of our biggest issues. Even in the transition to renewable energy across the continent, red tape, slow-moving regulators, different regulators in each country, and a lot of resistance generally to change is actually a problem. So there I'm saying yes, but in a negative way.
A negative yes. Yes minus.
If I may say that.
Give you one concrete example. We have to report on, as a public company, on 600 outputs in relation to DE&I activities. Last year we reported on 150. Our annual report for this year, published next year, we have to report on 600, for which we will have to get PwC as our auditors to audit it.
Dr. Landy, do you want to hop in on that point?
Regulation is necessary, and we are regulated in all sorts of different countries. But luckily, we operate in large jurisdictions where they have a limited number or consolidated regulation. So we do not have to report 600, thank goodness, 600 DEI statistics. And anyone who does, I feel sorry for you.
Yeah.
It's a pain.
Can we go back to the AI question for a second?
Sure.
I'm trying to remember his name now. It's not important. A senior executive in the AI space had a conversation with us a few weeks ago, and his view was that regulation is never going to be able to keep up with the speed of AI, and we're actually getting close to super intelligence faster than we think. So his view was that we need to find an ethical framework actually to regulate AI, not a government framework to regulate AI. If you think about that for a second, it's actually pretty interesting. I don't know how to implement it. We didn't get deep enough into that. But for all the companies that are building these systems, how you build them, how they're supposed to, let's say, manage and help manage society going forward to bring an ethical element into it is one of the solutions that's going to have to come. Because the regulators are not going to be fast enough.
But that's a very problematic area.
It is.
It's linked to social media and the people want to regulate and stop fake news. And do we get the Orwellian Ministry of Truth?
I have to break in. This is a fascinating conversation, but we have one more question for you that we have to get to and to stay on time. But let's come back to this, because I think I have one wrap-up question for you at the end that I think that is going to cover this ground, get us to AI. And it's going to be a moment. So last question for me for the yes or no round here. We're going to talk about sustainability. Europe has really ambitious climate goals, cutting greenhouse gas emissions by 55% by 2030, improving energy efficiency by 32%, net zero by 2050 is the big goal. And none of this comes cheap. Can the EU afford to sustain goals like this, or will it suffer for its ambitions? And by that I mean, is the cost of sustainability sustainable? Yes or no?
So
let's have a look.
Finally, I'm going to say yes.
A big no.
In a European context. So we're clear, in a European context.
That's correct. We're talking about Europe, and we have a 3-time optimist on the end. So Dr. Landy, let's start with you. Tell us why you're a yes.
I'm going to say yes because the way the question is framed, I would have said no. And so the goals as stated, I think, are unaffordable, but they will be adjusted. And because sustainability is an incredibly popular policy measure, the voting population is very much in favor of sustainable projects. Well, the voters are generally sensible and they don't vote for sustainability at any cost. So a raft of sustainable policies will get implemented. Probably some of the more ambitious ones will get dropped, and Europe will remain a world leader in renewables and sustainable policies.
No, the competitive pressures, you take two verticals, automotive, which you touched on, and financials. In both cases, really interesting. We had recent conversations where CMOs were saying, I know that my media budgets, my marketing budgets are going to be squeezed, so I have to reduce my non-working media costs in order to maintain my media budgets because I'm getting heavy price competition from EVs and heavy price competition from fintechs. So in those conditions where the squeeze is really on, growth is low, pressure on cost, the pressure on profitability means that the sustainable options, as we've seen in the short term recently, they move down the agenda in terms of priorities, and other things get prioritized, particularly for listed companies who have to file quarterly earnings.
Mr. Sinding, a yes again, 3 in a row. Tell us why. Is the cost of sustainability sustainable?
Well,
you say yes.
The way I think about it is that if you have two companies that are exactly the same in the same industry, and one of those companies can become more sustainable than the other over time, which one is going to attract the best young, smartest talent? Which one is going to have the best relationship, excuse me, with regulators? Which one will have the most robust value chain? Probably the most robust access to energy. A little frog in my throat here.
There's water right there if you want to grab that.
You.
Yeah.
And then which one will have the most positive long-term trajectory? If you put those together, I believe that the more sustainable one will become the more valuable company. We'll have a higher multiple, or if you want to put it in simplistic.
But they've got to do that.
And it's going to cost some money to get there. We believe that investment philosophy actually works. Is to take that, ignore the quarterly costs, and build for the long term. That's going to create value.
If you had a young person just graduating from university in the audience, what advice would you give them as to where they should locate themselves? Would you recommend that they develop their career in Europe? Would you recommend North America, South America, Asia? Africa, Middle East? Where would you recommend?
I would go a different direction. I would say, find an industry that you like and a company that you're inspired by that's purpose-driven.
That's what my dad
work
said.
there.
Yeah. But I think
But of course, from a macro point of view, right now my daughter is in Seoul, so she's
QE.
fine.
Good thinking.
So that if you're choosing a geography, you might you might want to
You're
broaden
hedged.
your horizon. So the family is hedged, yes.
At least you had the good grace to admit your daughter was in Seoul.
Yeah, but it's not true. It's not too long.
Is this green transition the solution to Europe's investor problem?
An investor problem.
What do you mean?
You said no. You said earlier not to invest in Europe.
I think it was further up the agenda with institutions. I mean, certainly in the conversations that we have, it was much further up the agenda 2, 3, 4 years ago. Maybe COVID was a turning point for it because it put huge pressure on companies. Some literally came to a stop, a full stop. So I think I think the prioritizing of it has changed. Although the pressure, from a climate point of view, if anything, has intensified. But I think it has moved down the agenda. I mean, you hear much more from institutions. There's much less pressure, I think, today than there was 3 or 4 years ago.
Why don't you have the last word, Dr. Landy, on why you're a yes? Take this one step further.
On sustainability,
How much is there? How about this? How much is too much?
I'll hand it over to.
Maybe that's better for Sir Martin.
Well, I think look, at the end of the day, I'm surrounded by hedge funds and private equity. I think the pressures that you're referring to, whether it's the economic pressure in Europe, whether the climate change, makes the difficulties of running a listed company increasingly less attractive. The quarterly earnings treadmill. One client said to us, where the recent CEO was elevated, financial services company last year, came and said to his CMO, why am I doing all this big brand stuff? Why don't I do much more performance-orientated, activation-orientated? Because I have to report every quarter. The great thing about being private equity is you don't have the regulatory pressure. You don't have the public company pressure. You don't have to report on those 600 outputs in terms of DE&I. And I think the attractions of the public sector, going back to the UK market, where we have a supply side thing as well, is a real problem. And therefore the attractions of being owned by EQT or any other PE firm are great.
Not any other.
You just got
that's
a,
not any
you
other.
just got a commercial.
No,
Can I just say one thing from the macro perspective?
Sure.
So it's very clear, as Sir Martin said, that things are changing in Europe, and partly that's because there is a war on Europe's eastern border. Tariffs are going up in different parts of the world. China is competing in European markets when it wasn't before. So the cost of sustainability has to be borne in mind against all the other costs, and the other costs are going up quite dramatically. So even the current plans are may well be too much when they're measured against.
And we haven't mentioned the impact of the Trump tariff if Trump gets back on Europe.
But I don't think it's a cost. I
There's
think it's an
EV
investment.
tariffs. There's so much to cover.
I think the
we're coming so
sustainability
close
question
to
is an
being out of
investment.
time. I'll take the last word on this as our,
Well, I just wanted to say,
close it out as our optimist on the
The
panel.
optimist says this is not a cost, it's an investment for the future.
I have one last question for the three of you. This relates to the Draghi report. It's not a yes or a no. It's a little bit different. In the report, Draghi calls for radical change. That's the word he uses, radical change in Europe to ensure a positive economic future. So very quickly, what radical change in Europe would change course and secure a brighter future?
Europe's biggest problem is capital investment. Over the last 15 years, Europe's investment has grown at half the rate of the US, and currently capital investment is about half annually of what is the amount in the US. Europe's got to do something about investment. Any kind of incentive to improve investment, for example, 100% capital allowances, abolition of capital gains tax, anything like that would make a massive difference.
Radical change.
No, you need radical leadership. Bring back Thatcher, bring back Reagan, bring back JFK. I mean, the problem is, it is about measures, but you have to have leaders who are prepared to take the measure, and we just don't have it. We're bankrupt from a leadership point of view.
And what's your solution? Radical solution?
We need a common capital market, and we need to deregulate massively.
These are huge ideas. I would like to see them. We would love to see these outcomes. And unfortunately, we're out of time to keep going on them. But I'd like to thank our debaters, Dr. Aaron Landy, Sir Martin Sorrell, Christian Sindig. It was just a wonderful conversation. So appreciate you being here. So appreciate you showing up and engaging in disagreement like this. It was really a great conversation. We so admire you for leaning into the debate format, and thank you to FII for collaborating on this initiative. We're honored to be knowledge partners here. And we're kicking off day 2 tomorrow with Clash of the Titans, 8:45 a.m. in the plenary session. So we hope to see you all there. Thanks again.